Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Katherine Bennett.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
And welcome to episode 4 of Discovering the Catechism with Gavin and Katherine. A reminder that we are using this version of the Catechism, but you can follow along with any version you like. We will address some of the differences as they arise, so do not worry about that. We're moving on to Chapter 1, Part 2, Ways of Coming to Know God. Paragraph 31. Created in God's image and called to know and love him, the person who seeks God discovers certain ways of coming to know him. These are also called proofs for the existence of God, not in the sense of proofs in the natural sciences, but rather in the sense of converging and convincing arguments, which allow us to attain certainty about the truth. These ways of approaching God from creation have a twofold point of departure: the physical world and the human person. Paragraph 31, Gavin, your comments.
This is terribly exciting because I've referred a number of times to The Hound of Heaven, that wonderful poem by Francis Thompson. I sought him down the days and years, the labyrinths of time. People who are searching for a God often, always, usually turn round and say, during this process, I found myself almost trapped, not trapped in a controlling sense, but overwhelmed by the evidence that the reality of God was impossible to avoid. To avoid the reality of God, you have to put yourself in a place of madness, a place of permanent contradiction, because what God does, the experience of God, is that he's the final key that joins everything we experience as human beings up and makes a consistency out of them. And that's why the Catechism is talking about these are not proofs in the ordinary sense. And so many people get bamboozled by the scientists, or rather by the empirical mind that comes out of the scientific revolution that took place in the 16th and 17th centuries. There is almost no way of proving anything. In science, you can reduce the possibility of being mistaken. But to move that over into the world of philosophy and metaphysics and morals is improper. None of us actually live by proof. If, for example, you and I were married, and I said to you, and you said, I love you, and you annoyed me, and I said, well, prove it. You couldn't. None of us in our families, none of us in our loves, none of us even in our friendships can prove to the other person that what is authentically taking place is there. And the trouble is, in our scientific culture, the word proof has been laden with a responsibility and a power that it just doesn't have. And what the Catechism is so beautifully saying is there is a convergence of meaning which synchronizes itself at every single level of the human existence. Morals, beauty, truth, music, love, ideas, longing, everything comes into gear the moment you encounter the face, the personality, the character of the loving God behind life as we experience it. It's a wonderful thing to do because it requires the seeker of God to come with an open mind. It's exactly what the atheists accuse us of not having. It is, in fact, their lack of the open mind that makes God inaccessible to them. And here's the Catechism saying, hang on to your seats, guys. Open your mind, and we will allow you to be overwhelmed by the presence of the living God in every aspect of your humanity.
That's brilliant. I really love where you went there. And you said earlier that you have to put yourself in a place of contradiction. And the problem is, as you have just said, we live in such a place now. We live in this, we're in very strange times. If you look at the whole history of man, the times that we're living in are unusual compared to those medieval minds. And I think that there's a danger, because I know that sometimes we feel we need to use philosophical arguments to draw people to God. But I was listening to Peter Kreeft recently, and he was talking about Machiavelli. And he said Machiavelli would also use logic and observation to come to radically different conclusions to, let's say, Aquinas. And he said that's because we have three assumptions about reality: a metaphysical assumption, an anthropological assumption, and an epistemological assumption about reality. And this goes to what you were saying. And he was saying that let's take Machiavelli. His assumption about reality is that it doesn't include ideals like good or like goods or values. That values are not facts; they're not objectively real. That reality consists only of material facts. So Machiavelli's, who, by the way, Machiavelli is a byword for the devil. And I think, although people seem to love a lot of what he said, they also hate it, but use it. And even the devil was called Old Nick at one point in reference to Machiavelli. So not only was Machiavelli called the devil, but the devil was named after Machiavelli. So there's a lot of danger. And we see that lived out today, I think. So this Machiavellian idea that reality consists only of material facts. Well, then if you have that metaphysical assumption, then your anthropological assumption is based on the idea that, well, if there's no objective reality and reality consists only of materialism, then man is also just a material being. Now, when man is just a material being, then everything becomes competitive, doesn't it?
It's all about control. Machiavelli.
It's all about power.
One of the reasons why Machiavelli may be a synonym for evil is that it assumes that human beings are to be treated in an instrumental way to achieve certain ends that have to do with control. So, that's very dangerous. That's very evil.
Yeah. So the anthropological assumption is that man is by nature wicked, selfish, competitive, and immoral. Now, this follows on.
Not made in the image of God.
Not made in the image of God. So this follows on from his metaphysical assumption of materialism. Now, because if only matter is real, then man is only matter, and matter is essentially competitive, then the more of some material thing you have that you give away, the less you have. So, for example, the more money I give to you, Gavin, the less money I have. Yeah? The more food I give to you, the less food I have. So my giving away necessarily means a deprivation for me. And so I'm competing with you. So material goods, money, power, territory diminish when shared. Yeah, because his metaphysical assumption is that only material things exist. There are no goods, there are no values, just material. So when you trade in that and you say, okay, now that I have that view of the universe, that all things are material, materialism is all I know, then of course, man, who is just material, that in the material world, the more you give, the more you lose. But if you factor in, you take a different metaphysical assumption and you factor in then spiritual goods, the more spiritual goods you share, wisdom, beauty, love, they multiply. So a teacher, for example, doesn't lose out by teaching. The lover doesn't lose out by loving. Those goods multiply. You grow in love, you grow in beauty, you grow in goodness. So only the idea of the spirit transcends this law, this Machiavellian law. So
can I put something in?
Do, please.
Just briefly, that was so helpful because I have this lovely picture of a firm atheist saying, it all makes sense for as long as I am a material person, but help, I feel a moment of metaphysical awareness coming on. Oh my God, what am I going to do with it? And the thing is that, of course, we are absolutely unable to resist moments of metaphysical awareness. It begins, for example, with where was I before I was born? And how is it I'm now aware and consciously aware when I haven't existed for 99.9 recurring % of the universe's history? And in a moment, I'm not going to exist again. This is the place of contradiction I talked about. To be aware, self-aware, to be conscious, and to know that we are entirely not only contingent on somebody else, but also that our non-existence seems to be something that the universe can cope with even if we can't, is to be in that place of contradiction. We cannot, therefore, avoid moments of metaphysicalness sweeping over us and bringing us out of the materialistic confines that Machiavelli wanted to confine us to. It can't be done. And that's why atheists are in such trouble. Every so often, everyone gets to feel a bit metaphysical. And then, as somebody said, if you're a young atheist, you cannot be careful enough about what books you avoid reading, because there are things that you will open your mind and you'll get a touch of the metaphysics and then you're lost to atheism, because only God can be the answer.
And so these three assumptions about reality: the metaphysical, that everything is material, there is no invisible or spiritual goods. The second, the anthropological, that if that's the case, man is just material, and therefore what man gives, man loses. And then thirdly is this epistemological claim of Machiavelli, that human history can be a science, that there can be a formula for success in life. And he talks about two things that exist. There's strength and power to compel others, and there's luck or chance, what can't be controlled. And he says that what we should do is maximize the first. We need to set about maximizing strength, power, forcing others to do what we want, and minimizing chance, those things that can't be controlled. And he reduces everything to power and chance. And in a way, that's actually a metaphysical claim. But here's the thing, that is the metaphysical ground of atheism. That's what that is. So it's not as if atheists don't have a metaphysics. It's that their metaphysical claim is that the strength, that power, that compelling others is something that has to be gained, and the reduction of chance and luck.
I think the argument, not your argument, his argument, contains a serious category error. You're absolutely right, and I think Machiavelli's noticed it, that if you're an atheist and you bring in the notion of chance, you have introduced something that can't be proved or controlled. Essentially, what he's trying to confine in the notion of chance everything that we would make and put into the hands of God. But the moment you bring any meaning into the universe, the whole universe must be shot through with meaning. The moment you bring any metaphysics, even if you disguise it as chance, you're stuffed, because actually that's not an adequate description of everything that happens beyond your control. And so once he allows that, he starts the trail of the possibility of God. You cannot confine God to chance and say, I'm therefore going to construct this, because no one knows what chance is. Effectively, what chance is a form of unexpected randomness within an attempt to impose cohesion. But the moment you have cohesion and randomness, you still have to work out a formula for them both. In the end, God is the formula for cohesion and coherence.
Exactly.
And the fact that you have to deal with both coherence and randomness at once means that you cannot confine yourself to a material universe. You've introduced the metaphysics.
That is why the conclusion of all of this is Aquinas wins, Machiavelli loses.
Absolutely.
And I'm so glad you said that. You've said exactly the thing that needs to be said, which is this: you can logic your way to something, you can philosophically reason to different opposing points, as Aquinas and Machiavelli did, but there comes a point where Machiavelli's view falls short, and it's on exactly that point. You miss out God, you miss out the order, you miss out the coherence, and you have to do that blindly. So an atheist has to get to a point where they say, I refuse to look. I refuse to recognise. Yes, the point of contradiction. And so atheists, by the way, if you're watching, feel free to carry on being atheists if you want, but it's self-contradictory, and it's a contradiction against reality. So I think in chapter 31, what we're saying here is the person who seeks God discovers certain ways of coming to know him, but you have to be honest. It's true. If you seek God, you will find God. But we live at a time, all of this discussion is meant to point to the fact that we live at a time where we are very, very, the odds are very much against us. They have been for a long time. Machiavelli was writing in the 15th, 16th century, and the odds are very much against us. We live in such a time, but the tide is turning, and we are entering now, I think, a period of re-enchantment and a recognition that those dark ages weren't as dark as we might claim them to be. 32, Gav. Are you ready?
I am.
The world. Starting from movement, becoming, contingency, and the world's order and beauty, one can come to a knowledge of God as the origin and the end of the universe. As St. Paul says of the Gentiles, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made. And St. Augustine issues this challenge: question the beauty of the earth, question the beauty of the sea, question the beauty of the air distending and diffusing itself, question the beauty of the sky, question all these realities. All respond, see, we are beautiful. Their beauty is a profession. These beauties are subject to change. Who made them, if not the beautiful one, who is not subject to change? I love it. 32.
This is just marvellous, because we are so vulnerable to beauty. Whether it's a sunset, oh, look at that, or the glory of nature, oh, and we express this cry of adoration, which of course is intended to be directed towards God. And the difficulty that our culture has is it wants to turn beauty into an idol. Beauty itself is a symbol and a beckoning. And if, rather like music, we try and control it and say, I've got you now, I possess you, then beauty dies and corrupts. But if we realize we cannot possess beauty, but we can only follow it, it leads us into the arms of the beautiful. It leads us into the arms of God. And when treated properly, beauty reveals not only God himself, who is the creator of all beauty, and put in this longing for beauty for us, but of course it reflects back on us and makes us beautiful too. So we get, if you like, we begin to reflect the beauty of God by going in search of beauty. And beauty exists, of course, in the arts, in music, in thought. Some thoughts are more beautifully constructed. Remember, you and I have had conversations where I've told you that I'm rather attracted to people whose minds are beautiful, because I love the beauty of the way in which thought appears and is contoured, the choreography of a beautiful thought. But everything depends upon us not trying to control or to possess beauty, but allowing God to use it rather like not a lure, but something for which we have an appetite and we need to follow in order to land up in his hands, so that ultimately when this gasp of adoration escapes our lips, it is directed directly towards him in love, because we found him. We found the source, the beautiful one, the source of everything that was beautiful and excited our adoration in life. Beauty is the most wonderful lures that carry us towards and into the arms of God, so long as we don't try and idolize it and possess it.
Yeah, yet again, I think this is something that modern man has been blinded to. You know, we're so distanced and increasingly distanced from nature, from reality, and placed into artificiality in the way we live our lives. And it gets worse and worse every year. And parents have to combat this with their children. It's a struggle. It's a struggle to get them to live in reality. And that reality is that beauty. Of course, I think this has been a route for many to come to knowledge of God. I know people personally who've said, in fact, do you remember we were in Chicago and Father Joshua Caswell, who is the at the Canons Regular, St John Cantius, that's it. He's the most, what the heck is his title? The most reverend something.
The enormously, exquisitely, fantastically, hyperbolically irreverent Father of the Order.
Father Joshua Caswell, everybody. Yeah, Father Joshua Caswell. He was telling us that his mum was the Saskatchewan Sledgehammer, and they were right. Pentecostal Christians and politician in Canada. And she went home one day and said, we're all going to become Catholic. And she had about 10 kids. And she said, you can either agree with me or get out. And like 8 of them agreed with her. And a couple just left home at 16 or 17. And one such son left home at 17 and said, I'm not going to be a Catholic and you can't make me. And got a caravan and literally lived in the wild in a caravan. And he recounts this tale of how this brother is now actually a Catholic priest. So her children, she's got 2 nuns and 2 Catholic priests from her children. And this brother went out into the wild, and it was his experience in nature that drew him to the truths of the Catholic faith. It was the awesomeness and the coherence and the beauty of that which man cannot make. No matter how much we marvel at man-made things, you cannot marvel at them more than we do a mountain, a sunset, the ocean, the waves. And if you've got a child on a beach and you say, do you want to play with this puzzle? They won't do it. They'll play in the waves, they'll play in the shallows, because the draw of nature is instinctively, the beauty of nature is instinctively more magnetic to us. It draws us in more than anything that man can create.
And it's alive. We can't make life. We're surrounded by the pulse of life. We can do all kinds of things. We can make engineering things of the most extraordinary complexity, but we can't make life. It's a Frankenstein thing in a way, coming back to it. But anyway, beauty. Beauty is this. We have an appetite for beauty that God has put into us, by which we can never, ever escape him. And if we do escape him, then we start a process of uglification. And most people, when they look at the uglification of a society built without God, particularly the kind of cities that we have, say, this is a terrible place to live. This destroys us. We can't, we've chosen the way of self-destruction. Once again, it's the place of contradiction. We need beauty. We create uglification. How can we find ourselves going towards beauty and free from uglification? Only by surrendering to God. God is the means by which we resolve this dreadful contradiction between being desperate for beauty and only being able to really, on our own, make uglification.
Yeah, you said there, we can't engineer this, and this is something else if we stop to think about it. We marvel at the things that man can engineer. Look, man can make a car, a computer, a spaceship. Isn't it amazing? And we say, this didn't just pop into existence. This is Pascal? The watchmaker's analogy, is that Pascal? Paley is Paley's watch, isn't it? Paley uses this argument and says, William Paley says, you don't walk past a watch and say that just appeared, it popped into existence. You know that it belongs to someone, it was created, it was designed, it has a purpose, it tells time. Yet why don't we look at the natural world and say, just as with the artificial world, things don't just appear, that they have some design, that they have an intelligent mind that created them for an end, for a purpose.
I'm so glad you brought up Paley and Pascal, because they both belong in this. So you just explained why Paley belongs in this. But Pascal, of course, is famous for his wager, saying that there is everything to be gained from believing in God if you turn out to be right, and nothing to be lost, and everything to be lost if you disbelieve in God. Because should God not exist, nothing comes from it. And so any sensible person will believe in God, because on the basis of the wager, you get a lot out of it if you're right, and you lose nothing if you're wrong. However, Pascal, just in case people don't know, Pascal was converted one night by being overwhelmed by the presence of God. And actually, if it's at all, can we take a second? Because this is just so beautiful, and not many people know it. So let me put in Pascal and his coat, because I'm now being taken on a mark. So, all right, not coat. Pascal had this experience of God, which he wrote about, and it is so archetypally wonderful that we might just read it out very briefly, a little bit of it. If
There's no rush, Gavin. We've got 15 years.
Good. Here we are. Here it goes. So so Pascal wrote this down on a piece of paper and sewed it into his coat. This is how this immensely clever mathematician came to face the year of grace 1654, Monday the 23rd of November, feast of St Clement, Pope and Martyr, vigil of St Chrysogonus, Martyr and others, from about 10:30 at night until about midnight. Fire. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not the philosophers and of the learned. Certitude, feeling, joy, peace. God of Jesus Christ, my God and your God will be my God. Forgetfulness of the world and of everything except God. He is found by the ways taught in the gospel. Grandeur of the human soul. Righteous Father, the world has not known you, but I have known you. Joy, 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 tears of joy. I have departed from him. They have forsaken me, the fount of living water. My God, will you leave me? Let me not be separated from him forever. This is eternal life, that they know you, the one true God, and the one that you sent, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. I left him, I fled him, renounced, crucified, but let me never be separated from him. He is only kept securely by the ways taught in the gospel. Renunciation, total and sweet. Complete submission to Jesus Christ and to my director. Eternally enjoy for a day's exercise on the earth. May I not forget your words. Amen. Thanks be to God. So that was his description of what happened to him in those 2 hours between 10:30 and 10:30 midnight. And of course, it's not a proof.
No.
It's just this overwhelming encounter with the living God that moved him from being an empirical intellectual to a passionate believer in Jesus Christ. And he then wrote all this down and he sewed it into his coat so that wherever he went, this record of his encounter went with him, no matter what he did. And not many people know about Blaise Pascal and this extraordinary, overwhelming encounter with the living God, God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. Fire. It's just marvelous.
Joy.
Joy.
I love that. I do. And you said I think you made a good point there. The only reason to believe anything is because it's true. So we're talking here in the Catechism about how there are proofs and there's this proof and there's that proof, and we mentioned Paley and Pascal, but that can get you what I love is that there are different routes in for different people. For someone Absolutely. It might be this, for someone it might be, but there are all different ways. There are as many ways as there are people to know truth. And we know Jesus Christ is truth. What is truth? Jesus is truth. He who sees me sees the Father. So, of course, Pilate was looking in the face of truth when he asks the question. And that's where we are today, many of us, is scrabbling around saying, what is truth? And truth is right there for the recognising, if only we recognise it. That line there, I just have to pick up on because it's so lovely. I was at the traditional. I was at Mass, which I go to is the traditional rite, the Tridentine rite, over Christmas, and it's a beautiful Mass. It's a beautiful church. I'm very fortunate to be blessed with the parish that I can go to as frequently as I'm able, and I had this deep sense. I think it was the midnight Mass on Christmas Eve. Never let me be separated from you, God. Take anything away, but don't let me be separated from you. And it was just the deepest hunger is all I can describe. And that is not something that can be quantified. It's not, you can't argue your way to that. And it cannot be seen. It cannot be put under a microscope. You can't empirically prove it. Machiavelli would have struggled a bit with that. But that's true. But that is true. And that is something that I think perhaps all we can do sometimes is, especially if we're parents and have our children that we're trying to raise and bring, return them to God, is give them the opportunities, provide those opportunities. And that's where the Catechism speaks about the beauty of nature, taking them outside of the artificial world that they've found themselves in and bringing them to God's beautiful creation.
I'll risk being autobiographical for a moment, because I was very touched by when you said that everyone has their own way of making this journey, and some are more odd than others. And one of the things I'm not exactly ashamed of, but I was unable to make my way to God simply by curiosity. So what God did was he allowed me at the age of 19 to fall in love with a paranoid, manically depressive, suicidal girlfriend who wanted to keep on killing herself. And it was in order to keep her alive and to manage the impossible pain of these contradictions, that I have to find God. Only God is sufficient to be able to take this dreadful combination of paranoia, manic depression, and suicide, and to bring the sense out of it. And it was only driven by that I then went on a search for God and then had an evangelical conversion. Some people do it in a more mature and balanced, reflective way. But for me, it took pain and sheer despair and horror. And then there was God waiting at the end of the search.
Yeah, but it often does. It often does, actually. And we've spoken about this in a recent video. Sometimes it's when things are stripped away that you recognize your need for something bigger than yourself, something outside of yourself, for your creator, for God who loves you, for love.
When your
And
comfort's taken away in particular.
yeah,
Yes.
but when you're puffed up, which sin has a tendency to do that to us,
Mm.
it puffs us up in our own estimation. And when we puff ourselves up, there's no room for anyone. God, no one. People, who cares?
Comfortable people don't experience the pain of the contradiction because they're
Yeah.
comfortable.
Yeah, good. Beautiful. Well, we're going to hurry on to paragraph 33.
I thought you said we had all the time in the world.
We've got all the time in the world, Gavin. The human person, with his openness to truth and beauty, his sense of moral goodness, his freedom and the voice of his conscience, with his longings for the infinite and for happiness, man questions himself about God's existence. In all this, he discerns signs of his spiritual soul, the seed of eternity we bear in ourselves, irreducible to the merely material, can have its origin only in God. I want to say we've covered that. In fact, we've demonstrated that the human person is longs for the infinite, and it's because we have this eternal soul and we're made in the image and likeness of God.
I think paragraph 33 repeats what it said, but I think it's doing so because I suspect the authors wanted to quote Gaudium et Spes, which is where that paragraph, the seed of eternity we bear in ourselves, irreducible, having its origin in God, comes from. So quite rightly, pointing us to Gaudium et Spes, they say here within the documents of the Catholic Church. So I suspect they put in paragraph 33 because they wanted to quote Gaudium et Spes. Jolly good idea. The documents of the Catholic Church are the place to look to discover some of the Second Vatican Council documents are marvelous. Gaudium et Spes is one of them.
Yeah, it's also to point out that the human person is different in all of creation. The human person has this unique capacity for God that other creatures don't have. Even though I know, Gavin, you want to spend your eternity with your dog. But that's another question. That's another question.
Another difficult and profound question for whom they only help really
which we won't get into.
Theosis indeed.
Yeah. Okay, on to 34. The world and man attest that they contain within themselves neither their first principle nor their final end, but rather that they participate in being itself, which alone is without origin or end. Thus, in different ways, man can come to know that there exists a reality which is the first cause and final end of all things, a reality that everyone calls God.
This is jolly difficult because we're back at another point of contradiction. The fact that we find ourselves in time and space, and yet everything in us says that time and space cannot be the mechanism for interpreting who we are. Only eternity can. And one of the reasons why human beings constantly think about the foreverness, the foreverness of being in love, for example, there's the foreverness of loving your dog or your children, is because there is a contradiction in being in time and space, which our longing for eternity and timelessness cannot be reconciled with. So I think what this paragraph is saying is, because we're made in the image of God, we have a natural sense. Lewis put it so beautifully, the amphibian thing. We belong outside time and space in a place of perpetual loving, mutual loving and adoration. And it's very awkward being in time and space because people keep on being born and dying. And every time there's a death, we say, but this is nonsense. This is the contradiction. How can it be that the person we have loved, maybe who gave us life, how can they now be dead? The fact of mortality produces one of the most painful aspects of this contradiction that we've talked about. And only some form of reconciliation of time and eternity time and space on one hand and eternity on the other can allow us to possibly bear the weight of the contradiction as we know it now from this side of the time-space continuum. It's very difficult. As half spirit and half matter, we can't conceive either of being completely matter, as in a stone, or completely spirit, as being an angel, because we're not. So we're caught always in this what ought to be a constructive and creative tension between the material and the spiritual. And therefore we need both to be able to apprehend God in a way that is more than just pure spirit, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Only the sacramental is able to deal with that tension of that spiritual which cannot be known and the material which can be known, and that longing for something as yet unknown is all is that's why we have to be a sacramental people.
And that's why the Mass is so enormously important, because in its intensity, it represents this fusion of spirit and matter, and the fact that some form of miraculous conversion needs to take place in order for them to hang together in a way that doesn't become mutually repudiating.
Yeah. We're on to 35, everybody. The final paragraph of this episode. Man's faculties make him capable of coming to a knowledge of the existence of a personal God. But for man to be able to enter into real intimacy with him, God willed both to reveal himself to man and to give him the grace of being able to welcome this revelation in faith. The proofs of God's existence, however, can predispose one to faith and help one to see that faith is not opposed to reason. So here we have recognition that that arguments for God's existence might predispose one to faith, but they can't ever alone bridge that gap or be that leap that to faith. But they have their place. I feel like that's the conclusion here.
Yes, in the end, we have to make this leap of faith. We have to leap into the arms of God and trust him. And only by having made that leap of love and trust can we then experience what happens. One of the things why sometimes religious people are so difficult to live with for atheists and agnostics is because we go around with this extraordinary ebullience to say, I found him, he's found me, I found him, it's all real, it's amazing. And the agnostics and atheists look upon us and say, what's got into you? And the answer is, I've made the leap of faith, I'm flying, I leapt off the cliff and there is air underneath my wings.
And they say, how do you know? And that's
Yes.
when you get into Machiavelli's metaphysics and that atheist metaphysics and that epistemology and that anthropology, which is, how can you know? Because my starting point is only the material exists. And if you say only the material exists, then you can't get further than that. So your whole metaphysics, your whole anthropology, your whole epistemology, there has to be a paradigm shift, which is why we call our conferences Paradigm Lost, because that paradigm has been lost. And we see what happens when that's lost. And it's not good and we're not happy. And the answer is God.
The answer is God. Yes, end of paragraph 35. The answer is God. There we go.
And so that brings us to the end of episode 4. And we will be back next time, episode 5, with part 1, with chapter 1, part 3, the knowledge of God according to the church. So see you next time. But for now, thank you for watching. I'm Katherine Bennett.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.